Today, we are looking at a set of economic and political developments that could have important implications for Iraq's fiscal position, banking system, and ultimately the long term environment surrounding the Iraqi dinar. The key point from this update is that several reforms are being discussed together: expanding digital payments, reducing the dependence on cash, improving tax collection, resolving the long running Kurdistan oil and revenue sharing mechanism, and completing the formation of the government so that major economic measures can actually be approved and implemented. For anyone following the Iraqi dinar, it is important to separate economic progress from speculation about an immediate exchange rate change. None of these individual developments automatically means that the dinar will suddenly receive a higher official value. Instead, these reforms address some of the underlying conditions that would make Iraq's public finances, banking system, and currency management framework stronger and more sustainable. Let's begin with the continued push toward digital payments and a reduced cash economy. This is one of the most important structural changes taking place across Iraq's financial system. For years, Iraq has remained heavily dependent on physical cash for everyday transactions. That creates challenges for transparency, tax collection, financial monitoring, and the ability of authorities to accurately understand economic activity. When transactions move through regulated digital channels, the government and financial institutions can gain better visibility into economic flows. Businesses become easier to monitor from a tax perspective. Financial institutions can improve compliance procedures, and the overall economy can gradually become more integrated into the formal banking system. For the Iraqi dinar, this matters because currency stability depends not only on the amount of money circulating in an economy, but also on confidence in the institutions managing that money. A stronger banking system can increase public confidence in holding and using dinars through legitimate financial channels instead of relying heavily on cash outside the banking sector. There is also a fiscal dimension. If more economic activity becomes visible to the tax authorities, Iraq potentially has an opportunity to improve non oil revenues. Iraq remains highly dependent on oil income, which means fluctuations in oil prices and production can have a major impact on government finances. Increasing tax efficiency does not eliminate that dependence overnight, but it can diversify government revenue and reduce some of the pressure on the federal budget. That brings us to the second major issue: the relationship between Baghdad and the Kurdistan region regarding oil revenues and federal budget transfers. This has been a complicated issue for years, involving oil exports, revenue transfers, salaries, constitutional questions, and disagreements over how revenues and expenditures should be calculated and administered. A clear and enforceable mechanisms would be significant because uncertainty surrounding oil revenues makes fiscal planning more difficult. If Baghdad knows more accurately how much revenue is coming in and what obligations it must meet, government budgeting becomes more predictable. For investors and financial institutions, predictability is extremely important. A government does not necessarily become financially stronger simply because it has large natural resources. The critical question is whether those resources generate predictable revenue that can be incorporated into a credible budget. That is why resolving the federal Kurdistan revenue mechanism could have implications beyond the political relationship itself. It could improve budget visibility, reduce disputes over transfers, and potentially limit financial leakage caused by recurring disagreements and emergency arrangements. However, viewers should also understand that an agreement on oil and revenue sharing does not itself create a new exchange rate for the dinar. It would instead strengthen the fiscal foundation behind Iraq's currency and government finances. The third major issue is the completion of the cabinet and the establishment of a functioning government capable of passing and implementing economic reforms. The news being discussed points toward a parliamentary vote around the 15th of August to 20. That timeline should be treated as a political development to monitor rather than as a guaranteed trigger for currency appreciation. A functioning government is important because economic policy requires institutional authority. Reforms involving banking regulation, taxation, digital payments, public spending, energy policy, and revenue distribution cannot be implemented effectively through announcements alone. They require legislation, regulations, budgets, administrative capacity, and enforcement. This is where the political and economic sides of Iraq's story intersect. If the government can establish a stable decision making process and consistently implement reforms, that could improve the credibility of Iraq's economic policy. But the market will ultimately judge results, not simply announcements. The important question will be whether reforms are actually implemented, whether institutions enforce them, and whether measurable improvements appear in government finances and the banking sector. For Iraqi Dinar followers, this distinction is extremely important. Currency discussions often focus on the possibility of a major revaluation, but a sustainable currency policy is much more complicated than simply changing a number on an exchange rate table. The Central Bank of Iraq has to consider inflation, foreign exchange reserves, money supply, banking sector stability, external payments, fiscal conditions, and overall confidence in the national currency. A stronger fiscal position can support currency stability, but that does not mean every fiscal improvement results in a higher exchange rate. In the short term, the developments described in this update could produce a positive signal if Iraq demonstrates meaningful progress. Digital payment expansion could improve transparency. Better tax collection could strengthen domestic revenue. A clearer oil revenue arrangement could improve budget predictability. And a functioning government could accelerate the implementation of economic reforms. But markets generally require evidence before assigning a lasting economic benefit. Investors, banks, international institutions, and businesses will look at actual revenue collection, spending discipline, banking sector reforms, payment system adoption, oil revenue management, and the government's ability to meet its financial obligations. That means the next stage is likely to be more important than the announcement itself. Over the longer term, successful implementation of these reforms could gradually improve Iraq's economic resilience. If the country can reduce financial leakage, strengthen tax administration, modernize payments, improve banking transparency, and establish a more predictable relationship between federal and regional revenues, the quality of Iraq's fiscal management could improve substantially. That would create a stronger foundation for the Iraqi dinar. But stronger foundation should not be confused with a guaranteed revaluation. There is no responsible way to claim that a specific reform automatically produces a specific exchange rate. Currency valuation is determined by a combination of monetary policy, economic fundamentals, market conditions, reserves, inflation, fiscal credibility, and policy decisions. This is especially important because Iraq's economy has enormous potential, but it also faces significant structural challenges. Oil remains dominant, the public sector carries substantial financial responsibilities, and the banking system continues to undergo modernization. Moving from a largely cash based economy toward a more transparent and digitally connected financial system is a major process that takes time. The idea behind these reforms is therefore not simply to create a headline about the dinar. The larger objective is to make Iraq's economy more efficient and its financial system more credible. If Iraq succeeds in reducing leakage and improving revenue quality, every additional dinar of government revenue can potentially be managed more effectively. If digital payments reduce the informal movement of cash, authorities may gain better visibility into economic activity. If the federal government and Kurdistan region establish a durable revenue sharing arrangement, budget planning could become more reliable. And if the government is fully operational, reforms can move from political discussions into practical implementation. Together, these developments could improve the environment in which the Iraqi dinar operates. For dinar followers, the most responsible approach is to watch the indicators rather than relying on dramatic predictions. Pay attention to official Central Bank of Iraq communications, government budget decisions, parliamentary actions, banking reforms, inflation trends, foreign exchange reserves, oil revenues, and measurable progress in digital payment adoption. Those indicators provide much more useful information than rumors about an overnight currency event. The immediate question is therefore not simply, will the dinar suddenly rise? The more meaningful question is whether Iraq is building the economic conditions necessary for long term currency stability and stronger financial credibility. If the answer continues moving in that direction, it could be significant. The coming weeks may therefore deserve close attention, particularly around government formation and parliamentary decisions. If the proposed political timetable progresses, the next challenge will be implementation. Passing reforms is one step. Enforcing them across government institutions, banks, businesses, and regional authorities is another. Ultimately, Iraq's economic story will be measured by execution. The push toward digital payments, improved tax collection, clearer oil revenue arrangements, and a functioning government should be viewed as pieces of a broader economic reform process. None of these developments independently guarantees a higher dinar exchange rate, but collectively, successful implementation could reduce fiscal pressure, improve transparency, strengthen revenue quality, and make Iraq's economic system more resilient. That is the fundamental issue investors and currency watchers should be monitoring. So, as we continue following the Iraqi dinar, remember that genuine economic progress is usually measured through data and policy implementation, not through speculation. If Iraq can turn these proposals into durable reforms, the long term economic implications could be meaningful. But the timing and magnitude of any future exchange rate decision remain matters for Iraq's monetary authorities and broader economic conditions. We will continue to follow the official developments, separate confirmed information from speculation, and bring you responsible analysis as the situation evolves. Thank you for watching Iraqi Dinar News. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video for future factual and responsible Iraqi Dinar updates. And always remember, this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice.